Maria Delgado had never considered herself anything special. She was the kind of woman who blended into the background of a room without trying, the sort of person who smiled politely at strangers and never raised her voice above what was necessary. She worked as a part-time librarian in a small town in New Mexico, and most days looked exactly like the ones before them. She woke up early, made coffee, fed her cat, and walked the 6 blocks to the library where she spent hours organizing shelves and helping people find books they were not entirely sure they were looking for. It was a quiet life, and for a long time, Maria told herself that quiet was enough. She was 43 years old when her life took a turn she had not planned for. The local community center, a modest building with peeling paint and a parking lot full of potholes, had recently started a new adult enrichment program. The idea behind it was simple enough: give people in the community a chance to try something new, whether that was painting or cooking or learning a basic instrument. The program was run by a retired music teacher named Harold Sims, a tall man in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes, who believed that creativity did not have an age limit. Harold had posted flyers around town, and somehow one of those flyers ended up tucked between 2 books on the return cart at the library, and Maria picked it up without thinking too much about it. She had always been curious about the piano. That was the honest truth. As a child, there had been an old upright piano in her grandmother's house, dark wood and slightly out of tune, sitting in a corner of the sitting room like a forgotten guest. Maria used to press the keys softly when no one was watching, not playing anything in particular, just listening to the sound each note made as it filled the air and faded. Her grandmother had noticed once and offered to arrange lessons, but her mother had said there was no money for that, and the subject was dropped and never came back up. By the time Maria was grown, the piano had been sold and her grandmother had passed, and the whole thing had become one of those small childhood memories you keep but rarely examine. So when she saw the flyer advertising beginner piano lessons for adults, something stirred in her chest that she could not quite name. She signed up that same afternoon, almost before she could talk herself out of it. The class met on Tuesday evenings in a back room of the community center, where 4 old digital keyboards had been set up on folding tables. There were 7 students in the group, ranging in age from 26 to 71. Some of them had tried piano before and given up. Others, like Maria, were coming to it for the first time in any serious way. Harold was patient and methodical, and he started them all on the very basics: hand position, reading notes, understanding the difference between the treble and bass clef. For the first 2 weeks, they practiced nothing more than simple scales and one-handed exercises. Maria practiced at home on a small keyboard she bought second-hand from a woman who had posted it online for $30, and she took the whole thing more seriously than she let on to anyone around her. By the 4th week, Harold decided it was time to give each student a small assignment. He called it a performance task, though he used the word loosely. The idea was that each student would choose a short, easy piece and play it in front of the rest of the group at the end of the following session. Nothing complicated, he assured them. Something manageable. He suggested a few beginner pieces and told them to pick whatever felt comfortable. Most of the class chose simple songs, a few bars of something recognizable, the kind of melody a child might pick out with one finger. Maria nodded along with everyone else and said she would find something appropriate. What happened next was something she had not shared with anyone. That same night, she went home and sat at her little second-hand keyboard and began to play something from memory. She had not realized until that moment that she actually had something in her memory to play. Over the weeks of practicing scales and exercises, something in her hands had been waking up, and now it was moving on its own toward a melody she had heard somewhere long ago and absorbed without knowing it. She played it slowly, then again, adjusting and filling it in as she went. It was not a beginner piece. It was not simple at all, but it was hers in some way she could not explain, and the more she played it, the more certain she became that this was what she wanted to bring to the group. She did not tell Harold in advance. She did not tell the other students. She kept going to class each Tuesday and doing exactly what everyone else was doing, practicing the easy exercises, nodding at Harold's instructions, giving no indication that she was working on something different at home. She was not trying to impress anyone. That was important to understand about Maria. Impressing people had never been something she thought about. She was doing it because it felt honest, because playing anything less than what she had found inside herself would have felt like a kind of small betrayal she could not justify. The night of the performance arrived with no fanfare. It was a Tuesday like any other, cold outside and warm in the community center, the smell of old carpet and coffee in the air. The 7 students arranged their chairs in a loose semicircle, the way Harold had asked, and the keyboards were pushed slightly to the side to make room for the one that would be used for the performances. Harold had brought in a slightly better instrument for the occasion, a newer digital piano with weighted keys that he had borrowed from the high school music department. He set it up at the front of the room and adjusted the bench with the same quiet care he gave to everything. And then he turned to the group with a warm smile and told them all how proud he was that they had made it this far. He said it without any of the exaggerated enthusiasm that sometimes made adults in these situations feel like they were being talked to as children. He meant it simply, and it landed simply. The first student to play was a young man named Derek who worked at the hardware store on the edge of town. He was 26 and had the kind of nervous energy that made him tap his foot even when he was sitting still. He chose a simplified version of a folk song that Harold had printed out for the class in the second week, and he played it carefully, hitting most of the notes and missing a few, pausing once in the middle before collecting himself and finishing. When he was done, the group clapped and Derek laughed at himself in the relieved way people do when something stressful is finally over. Harold said something encouraging about his timing, and the evening moved on. One by one, the others went. There was a woman named Patricia who was in her late 50s and had taken up piano after her youngest child left for college. She played a gentle melody with both hands and looked down at the keys the entire time with an expression of total concentration. There was a retired postal worker named Glenn who played with more confidence than skill, but made up for it with obvious joy. There was a young woman named Sophie who stumbled through her piece and laughed nervously, and then played it again more steadily. Each performance was modest, genuine, and met with honest applause. The room had the comfortable feeling of a place where no one was being judged. Maria was the last to go. She had been sitting quietly through the other performances, clapping at the right moments and watching each person with genuine attention. If she was nervous, she did not show it in any obvious way. Her hands were folded in her lap and she sat straight in her chair. And when Harold finally called her name, she simply nodded and stood up and moved to the bench in the unhurried way she moved through most things in her life. She sat for a moment before she played. Not a dramatic pause, just a natural settling, the way a person takes a breath before beginning something that requires their full attention. Harold was standing slightly to the side with his arms crossed and a pleasant, expectant expression on his face. The other students shifted in their chairs and got comfortable, ready for another short and earnest beginner's piece. What came out of the piano was not that. Maria's hands opened across the keys, and the first notes came out full and certain, nothing like the careful single-note exercises they had all been practicing for weeks. It was a piece that moved, that had shape and weight to it, with the left hand laying down something steady and warm, while the right hand moved through a melody that was immediately recognizable as something emotionally layered. It was not a performance piece in the showy sense. There was nothing flashy about it, but there was a quality in the playing that was different from everything that had come before it that evening, a kind of intimacy in the way each note was chosen and placed, as if she were not performing the music so much as having a private conversation with it in front of everyone. Harold uncrossed his arms within the first 30 seconds, The room went completely still. Derek, who had been leaning back in his chair with his legs stretched out, sat slowly upright without seeming to notice he was doing it. Patricia, who had been quietly reviewing the sheet music in her lap, set it down. No one spoke. No one shifted in their seat or coughed or looked around the room. They all just listened, and the listening had a different texture than it had during the earlier performances, the way the air in a room can change when something unexpected passes through it. Maria played for just over 3 minutes. The piece had a natural arc to it, building gently in the middle section before coming back to something quieter at the end. And when the final notes faded, she lifted her hands from the keys in a smooth, deliberate way and placed them back in her lap. She did not look up immediately. She looked at the keys for a moment, the way a person looks at something they have just said out loud that they have been carrying quietly for a long time. The silence lasted a few seconds longer than anyone intended. It was Harold who spoke first, and his voice when he found it was not the steady, instructional voice he had been using all evening. It was softer, and there was something in it that sounded like genuine surprise mixed with something harder to name. He asked her, quietly and directly, where she had learned to play like that. The rest of the group had begun to stir out of their stillness, and a few of them leaned forward slightly, as if they too wanted to hear the answer. Maria looked up from the keys and seemed almost uncertain how to respond, not because she was being modest in a performed way, but because the honest answer was something she had only just begun to understand herself. She told Harold that she had not learned to play like that anywhere in particular. She said it plainly, without apology or decoration, and the room stayed quiet enough that everyone heard her clearly. She explained that she had been practicing the assignment he had given, that she had genuinely intended to play something simple and appropriate. But that one evening at home, something else had come forward and she had followed it. She said the melody was one she had been carrying somewhere inside her for most of her life, without ever having the means to bring it out, and that the weeks of exercises and scales had somehow given her hands enough of a foundation to find it. She paused for just a moment and then added that she was not entirely sure that was a sufficient explanation, but that it was the most truthful one she had. Harold looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he asked her to stay after class. The other students began gathering their things slowly, in the way people do when they are not quite ready to leave a room that has held something worth staying in. A few of them stopped to say something to Maria on their way out. Derek told her that was the most beautiful thing he had heard in a long time, and seemed slightly embarrassed by his own sincerity. Patricia took her hand briefly and did not say anything at all, which somehow said more. Glenn, the retired postal worker, told her she ought to be on a stage somewhere, and Maria thanked him with the small, genuine smile she gave to things she did not entirely know how to receive. When the room emptied out, Harold pulled 2 of the folding chairs close together near the piano and sat down and waited for her to join him. He had the look of a man who was carefully choosing how to begin something. He asked her first about her background, whether she had any formal training she had not mentioned, whether there had been lessons at some point she had simply forgotten to bring up. Maria shook her head and told him about her grandmother's piano, about pressing the keys as a child, and the lessons that never happened, about growing up in a household where music was something you listened to rather than something you made. Harold nodded slowly as she spoke, and when she finished, he sat with what she said for a moment before responding. He told her that what she had played that evening was not the product of a few weeks of adult beginner lessons. He said it carefully, not as an accusation but as a simple fact that needed to be named. He said that somewhere in her, there was an understanding of music that went beyond what she could have developed recently, and that the most likely explanation was that she had been absorbing it passively her entire life in ways she had never been given the opportunity to express. He used the phrase muscular memory, and then corrected himself and said it was more than that. He said some people carry music in them the way others carry language, naturally and without being taught, and that for most of those people, All they ever need is a small door to open, and the rest begins to find its own way out. Maria sat with that for a moment. She was not a person who accepted compliments easily, not because she lacked confidence exactly, but because she had spent so long operating in a life where no one had occasion to offer them in any significant way. She told Harold she appreciated what he was saying, but that she did not want to overstate what had happened. She said she had played one piece reasonably well, and that it would be a long stretch from there to anything meaningful. Harold smiled at that, not unkindly, and told her that was exactly the kind of thing people said when they were not yet ready to take seriously what they were capable of. He told her he wanted her to continue with the group for the remaining sessions, but that he also wanted her to consider something additional. He mentioned a small recital that the community center held every spring, open to students of all levels. Nothing formal, just an opportunity to play in front of a slightly larger audience than a Tuesday evening class. He said he thought she should be on the program. Maria told him she would think about it. It was not a polite deflection. She genuinely needed to think about it, because something about what Harold was proposing felt larger than a simple yes or no. It was not the recital itself that gave her pause. It was what agreeing to it would mean about who she was willing to believe herself to be. She drove home that night through the quiet streets of her town with the radio off, which was unusual for her. She normally filled drives, even short ones, with sound. But that night she wanted the quiet, and she sat inside it and thought about the piano and about Harold's words, and about the strange feeling that had moved through her hands while she played that evening. It had felt like recognition. That was the closest word she had for it. Not performance, not effort, not even music in the abstract sense. It had felt like recognizing something about herself that had always been true and had simply been waiting for the right conditions to become visible. She fed her cat when she got home and made a cup of tea she did not finish, and sat down at her second-hand keyboard without turning on any lights. She did not play anything formal. She just let her hands move and listened to what they found. And what they found surprised her again. Different notes this time, a different shape, but the same quality of something real and unhurried underneath it all. She sat there for a long time. In the days that followed, she said nothing about the Tuesday evening to anyone at work, which was not difficult since the library was not a place that invited personal conversation in any deep way. She went about her usual routines and shelved books and helped patrons find what they were looking for, and on the surface, nothing had changed. But inwardly something had shifted in a way she could not reverse, the way a door that has been opened cannot be made to look as if it was never touched. She found herself thinking about music during parts of the day when she had never thought about it before, noticing it in passing cars, and in the background of the coffee shop she stopped at on her way to work, and in the rhythm of her own footsteps on the pavement. By the end of the week, she called Harold and told him she would do the recital. The spring recital was held on the last Saturday of April, in the main hall of the community center, which had been tidied up considerably for the occasion. Someone had replaced the flickering overhead light that had been broken since November, and the folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, facing a small raised platform where the borrowed high school piano now sat. By the time the doors opened, the hall had filled with a modest but genuine crowd, mostly family members of the performers, and a handful of community regulars who showed up for most things the center put on simply because they believed in showing up. It was not a grand venue by any measure, but there was something warm about it, the kind of warmth that comes from a room full of people who are there not out of obligation, but out of actual care for the people about to perform. Maria arrived early and sat alone near the back for a while, watching the room fill. She had told no one from her personal life about the recital. She had no particular reason for this that she could put cleanly into words. She had no close family nearby, and the friends she had were the comfortable, low-maintenance kind she saw occasionally for coffee, and did not share interior things with easily. She had considered mentioning it to a colleague at the library, and then decided against it, not from embarrassment but from something more like protectiveness. Whatever this was, she wanted to experience it on her own terms before it became something she had to explain to anyone. Harold found her near the back and sat beside her briefly to go over the order of the program. She was scheduled to play third from the end, which he said he had arranged deliberately because he wanted the evening to have a strong finish, and he trusted her to help provide it. Maria told him again that she did not want the pressure of that expectation, and Harold told her again that it was not pressure he was offering, but simply an honest assessment of what she brought to a room when she played. They had had a version of this conversation several times over the preceding weeks, and by now it had the comfortable quality of a running exchange between two people who understood each other's positions. The recital began at 7 and moved at an easy, unhurried pace. There were 14 performers in total, ranging from a 9-year-old girl who played a short classical piece with immaculate posture to a man in his 60s who had been taking lessons for 2 years and played with more heart than precision. Each performance was met with warm and genuine applause from the audience, the kind that comes not from politeness, but from a room of people who are genuinely happy to be witnessing something, however small. Harold introduced each performer with a few quiet words and kept the transition smooth, and the evening had a flow to it that felt natural and unforced. When Harold introduced Maria, he said only that she had joined the beginner class earlier in the year, and that she had something worth listening to. He did not oversell it. He stepped back and let her come to the piano. She walked to the bench and sat down the same way she always did, with that unhurried quality that had nothing performative in it. The room settled. She looked at the keys for just a moment, and then she began. She played 2 pieces that evening instead of 1, something she and Harold had discussed and agreed on in the final week of preparation. The first was the melody she had played in class that Tuesday night, the one that had come from somewhere deep in her memory and found its shape through her hands in the quiet of her apartment. It moved through the hall with the same intimate certainty it had carried the first time she played it, and the audience received it in the same way the Tuesday class had, with a stillness that was its own form of attention. The second piece was something newer, something she had developed over the weeks since that evening, built from the same instinct but fuller in its range, more confident in what it was willing to say. When she finished the second piece and lifted her hands from the keys, the silence that followed was a few seconds longer than comfortable, and then the applause came, and it was different from what had preceded it that evening in a way that everyone in the room seemed to feel without being able to articulate. Several people stood without any apparent coordination, simply because sitting still no longer felt like the right response. Maria turned on the bench and looked at the room, and for a moment seemed genuinely caught off guard by what she saw, as if she had been so deeply inside the music that she had briefly forgotten there were people listening. She thanked the audience quietly and returned to her seat in the back row, and Harold squeezed her shoulder as she passed him and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. Afterward, in the slow dispersal of the crowd, several people approached her with the slightly uncertain manner of those who want to say something meaningful and are not sure they have the right words. She received each of them with the same quiet grace she had brought to the whole evening, genuine and unassuming, and without any of the false modesty that can sometimes feel like its own kind of performance. On the drive home, she let herself feel it fully. Not pride exactly, though there was some of that, and not relief, though there was some of that too. It was something quieter and more permanent, the feeling of a person who has finally been introduced to a part of themselves they always suspected was there but had never had the chance to meet. She thought about the grandmother's piano in the corner of the sitting room and the small child pressing keys in the silence of an empty room, and she thought that if she could go back and say something to that child,